Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of Self Pub Sunday. Today, we're joined by the lovely Palmer Pickering, and I am so excited to have you on, Palmer. We've tried to do this earlier, and the weather just did not cooperate. And now I've got the weather on my hand. We've got a big thunderstorm going through, so if you hear thundering or see lightning in the background, that's just Mother Nature and the Southeast US doing its thing. But welcome. I'm so excited for this.
Hey.
So I thought we would start with some icebreakers first while people kind of trickle in. So you write both science fiction and fantasy and science fiction fantasy mix. Is there a genre that you feel most comfortable in or you prefer to write in?
Yeah, I definitely prefer fantasy. In fact, my science fiction is actually science fantasy. I haven't written straight science fiction because I like magic and I like kind of the unknown and the mystery of mysticism. So I tend towards that. Yeah, the Star Children saga, which is Moon Deeds, is the first book. I kind of consider it to be fantasy in a science fiction setting because it's tricky because the themes, one of the long arc theme, you could consider it to be either science fiction or fantasy, and we could talk about that. It's basically an origin story. Yeah.
So when you're in the middle of a writer's block, because we all get writer's block every now and then, what is one thing that is sure to get you out of that?
So I actually have come to like writer's blocks because the solutions typically are more interesting than what I had planned, like in the first place. So I'm like, you might get to this question later, but I'm kind of a combo pantser and plotter. And sometimes what I plan to do isn't how the story actually unfolds. And then so I end up like painting myself in a corner. And so then I get stuck, right? And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now? And then I normally take like a couple of days to just kind of think on it. And then I do a couple things. One is I think of, is there an element of magic I could bring in here to make the story more interesting at this point? And if so, I'll do that. Or is there something totally unexpected or totally different than I had thought of before to bring into the story? And that's typically what unravels these knots, right? Is something really not linear, not part of the plan. And then those sections become like really interesting and like fun and delightful. And so I've come to the point where if I have a writer's block, I'm like, okay, well, however I'm going to get out of this trap is going to be like way more interesting than what I expected. So that's kind of what I do with writer's blocks.
I love it. So I want to talk briefly about your writing career and your writing inspirations. Have you always been a writer, or when did you first realize like this is what I want to do?
I was just an insanely prolific reader growing up. I would always go to the library and come home with a stack of books, and I would like fly through them, and from an early age. And I started writing kind of little short stuff. I've told the story a bunch of times, but with a friend of mine, we would read these 2-minute mysteries, which was a mystery on 2 pages. And then we would write our own. So we wrote all these little short stories, like mini short, whatever they're called, micro short stories. Right. And then I started writing as I got into like adolescence. That was like we were 10 or something, right? Or 8, I don't know, young. And then when I started getting in adolescence, I started writing stories about stuff that just stirred me, like things I didn't understand, things having to do with sexuality and drugs and stuff. Because I grew up in a time when there was a lot of drug stuff on TV. It was all over the place. And so then I wrote some stories trying to understand what that was all about. And I would write from the point of view of the perpetrator of violence or the drug user and using my imagination. And I would, and this was like, I was young, right? I was like, I don't know, 10, 12. And, or this, I don't know when adolescence, if I was an adolescent or earlier. I think one was like when I was 10, and one was like maybe I was 13. And some adults read the stories and they freaked the heck out of them. And they were like, oh my God. And they were like so realistic and so like adult. And so their fear scared me. So I stopped writing for a long while until I like got into, I guess after college, because I had to write a lot for college because I didn't major in creative writing. I did some poetry, but I majored in like liberal arts, random liberal arts stuff in education. And after college, I quit my day job I had a really like good job in advertising on Madison Avenue in New York City, which actually was Fifth Avenue, but it was not right next door to but it was the Madison Avenue advertising scene. I was an account executive. I'd wear a suit every day. I like managed a mutual fund in the finance industry, right? Did some Procter and Gamble stuff, and I quit to write the Great American Novel. And I was living in a really cheap flat, unrenovated flat in Brooklyn at the time with a bunch of bicycle messengers and cockroaches crawling out of the broken brick walls and sleeping on a floor on a futon, with no furniture. And I was like, wait a second, I still have to pay my rent, even though it was cheap because there were 4 of us splitting it. I was like, well, I guess I need to still work somehow because I'm not going to like sell this novel today. Yeah. So I ended up waitressing at a jazz club in New York, which was super fun. And I met my ex-husband there. So that was super fun. He was in a band and I was kind of wild and crazy in my youth. And yeah. And I ended up working more hours waitressing than I was advertising. So that didn't really work out. But in the advertising business, I was using kind of that creative energy and it was really like had to be on all the time. Whereas in the waitressing, like, would you like your burger medium or rare? It doesn't really take a lot of brain power. So I still had like writing energy at the end of the day or during the day, actually, because I work nights to write. So I was writing something which is sort of a Watership Downish kind of thing about a pet rabbit I had that I was all like sad about. And I was writing this sad rabbit thing and how he becomes free and, is happy. And I never actually finished it. That was my Great American Novel that I quit my lucrative job to write. Anyway, yeah. So then I've been writing since then, and I wrote a bunch of different stuff. I could go on. So if you want me to keep talking about anything, just like prompt me because I could actually talk for hours.
Okay. So I'm fascinated. I had a similar experience with adults thinking my writing was too real, but from a much more depressing side of things where I think it was like 8th grade and we had to write a children's book and we had to like do the, write it out, do the pictures and like we did the fancy covers and everything. But my teacher didn't define what age was children's book. And so I wrote mine for like more like a YA audience, an older audience, and it was supposed to have like an uplifting ending, but it was like the most depressing book. Like it had like 4 main characters and like they were like childhood best friends. There was 2 guys and 2 girls and they, married each other and then one died of cancer at like the very beginning of the book and like their spouse was like horribly depressed because of it and they had to like essentially learn how to work through life and what life throws at them. And my teachers were terrified that like I was like first of all, that things are bad at home. Someone was like dying of cancer at home, but also that I was suicidal because of it and I had to go to counseling and everything.
Oh my God.
And then they made me change the ending. And I'm like, but that like changes the entire story. So
If you had
that's
different teachers, they would have like submitted it for some award of, young authors.
that was the thing. Like my English teacher had no problem with it. It was all the other teachers, like we had like teams of teachers.
Mhm.
And so like the science teacher was the one that had the biggest problem with it. I'm like, you're not even the English teacher. My English teacher loved me. She was like convinced I was going to become a famous writer someday. She like made we had like these like weekly assignments where we basically did free writing in our journals during class. And it was like, you had to write like at least like 5 paragraphs, and I would write like 5 pages worth of stuff. And like one day she announced to the class that I was going to be a famous writer and everyone needed to get my autograph. And like the whole class lined up and I was mortified.
No way. Oh my God. All right. Well, the pressure's on now.
I know, right? I'm
Come
like,
on, Kate. Like, come on.
speaking of unfinished projects, I still have my MFA thesis from like 10 years ago. That was supposed to be my first book. It's still not done. It's nonfiction, and I get stuck in that research loop where I find the research more interesting than the actual writing that I'm doing.
Yeah. You definitely have to love research, I think, to be a SFF author, right? Because whether it's science fiction or it's fantasy, if it's science fiction, you have to have fact that's accurate, right? Because science fiction readers demand that because it's about the science, right?
It has to at least sound real.
Well, if it is something that has a factual equivalent, now it has to be, it really has to be accurate. Otherwise, they will dismiss you and they'll stop reading. This is the hard science. There's hard science fiction where it's very fact-based and it has to be accurate. And typically people who write that genre have lived whatever the story's about, whether they were in the military or they were a doctor or whatever, and they're writing about stuff that they know, right? And yeah, it goes off into the potential, the what if, where that then is what makes it fiction, right? So those things can deviate, but when you go ahead and you mix science fiction with fantasy, then you have this suspension of disbelief or whatever it's called. I always get that phrase wrong. Suspension of belief or suspension of disbelief. This must be suspension of belief. I always get it backwards. So some people who love science fiction have a hard time mixing magic with their science fiction because they're like, wait a second, you just broke the paradigm for me and my brain can't handle it and it sucks, right? Like some people love it. I personally love it. But anyway, back to research, so like Moon Deeds, a lot of it took place on the moon. The second 2/3 is on the moon. It's a moon colony. And I did extensive research. I have tons of books on like moon soil, and, I wanted to be accurate about the position of Earth and the length of the days, which is 2 weeks and 2 weeks, dark and light, and the rotation of the moon and like all this. I would draw diagrams and I would get myself all backwards because I was trying to do phases of the Earth from moon. So, we have phases of the moon. Phases of the Earth are like kind of mirrored, but nobody has documented the phases of the Earth from moon. So I figured it out myself and I would draw all these diagrams, and sometimes I'd get backwards because I'm sort of a little dyslexic and direction challenged. And so then I would drive myself crazy drawing all these diagrams of the phases of the Earth, and like how where the sun is in relation to it. And it's complex, right? Because it's this, the moon is orbiting Earth on some elliptic angle, and Earth is rotating around the sun and in 28.5 day cycles. I mean, so anyway, so I just geeked out on that. And for fantasy, like swordsmithing, like how do you make a 1,000-fold blade? How do you purify carbon from a meteorite? All this stuff, how do you shear a sheep? Like, so I just go off in all these rat holes of research, which I love. Fortunately, I really love that. But yeah, it can be distracting. Like instead of writing for say on a Saturday when I have 4 hours to write, instead of writing a word, I'm like, looking about how to weave flax.
And it's interesting to see the types of things because of the research that you then become like obsessed with. Like with me, I became obsessed. The 2 chapters that haven't been written yet or have been rewritten too many times include Mary Queen of Scots and the Scottish history, because that's where my family originated from. And on the other side of things, reincarnation. And I became like, there's way more about Mary Queen of Scots than there is about reincarnation. But that's like Scotland and Scottish history became like one of my huge obsessions because I just like found myself reading tons and tons of books on the history. And then I'm like, I haven't done any writing or I keep writing the same like 5 pages in the chapter. And then I get stuck at the same point every time.
It's a real thing, man. Like in Moon Deeds, the first part, Tor is in a war. He's a sharpshooter. He's got guns, right? And so I was like, I've never been in the military. I'm not a man. And I have shotguns actually. I'm pretty good shot. I'm a good at target practice, but I'm not like a soldier, right? And so I'm like, so I have to get into a man's military mindset at war and learn all about guns. So I read all these autobiographies of like Navy SEALs to see like their mindset and how because I also have a section about killing in war and PTSD. I mean, that one of the themes is around that, about the PTSD of soldiers who have killed in war. And so, I did a lot of research on that on forums where, soldiers are talking to each other about their experiences and anyway, these autobiographies, and I have like 10 of these autobiographies, really interesting actually. And then one of my beta readers was an Army Ranger, and I worked with him, and we would get in a room with a whiteboard, and he would talk about ballistics and the angle of the bullet and blah, blah, so I would just go on. The research is extensive, right? So writing something you don't know is super hard, because if you want to be accurate, you have to learn a lot, and you have to, so there's one paragraph about shooting the gun that probably took me weeks to write that one paragraph. I keep coming back to it, and I would check and I would write it again. Like this one paragraph literally took me weeks. Whereas stuff that's fantasy, so here we go, science fiction being harder for me than fantasy, I can just, I can just roll out the fantasy pages like nothing, right? Particularly around magic and spirituality, because that's kind of what I kind of live my life. I was reading about witches when I was a kid. I would read all the witch books I could find in the library, and I've practiced in spiritual energy medicine for years, and and telepathy and all this stuff. I dabbled in the whole like new age woo-woo stuff, and I was heavy into that for a while. So it's sort of just and plus my dad's a minister. I grew up in a spiritual, with like, he had tons of books, and my mom also was a minister, tons of books around world religions. One of my majors was concentrations was religion. So all that kind of spiritual and unseen forces all comes really natural to me, and I can just, and I read a lot about practice some shamanism and stuff. So that stuff is really easy for me to write. But shooting a gun as a a sniper, not easy.
Well, if you ever have any more questions, my partner was a sniper in the Marines for
no way
years. So
now you tell me. Now I need you. You should read. Get him to read the first part of Moon Deeds, which is like 200 pages, and have him rate how I did.
Okay, we'll see if he does. Which is probably why he's much better at video games than I am, because he's actually he's got like the 20/20 vision, and like he can shoot like a guy from like way, I'm like
a mile away.
I didn't even see that guy before you killed him. So
yeah. The first person shooter games. Yeah, I mean, he must be a force to be reckoned with in the video game land.
Oh my gosh, we tried to play Gears of War at one point, and it was like every like 5 minutes he had to come and revive me because I would get killed again.
Yeah, yeah. The new book I was talking to you about before we got online, Darktown, is lit RPG. It is that one. I'm not a first person shooter gamer. I like MMOs, RPGs. So I like my favorite games, right, are Final Fantasy 14 and Witcher 3. And so I use those two as the inspirations for this book, Darktown. It's a series, actually. So it's not a first person shooter or lit RPG. It's a kind of portal fantasy,
Yeah.
dungeon crawl kind of, that kind of book. So yeah. What were we talking about? Research. Oh yeah. What's your next question?
Well, that actually leads perfectly into my next question, which is, who are your writing heroes or inspirations? I like to call them writing heroes, but other people call them inspirations.
Yeah, I mean, there was a whole class of books that were inspirational for me as a youngster, as a child and a teenager, like the whole C.S. Lewis, Narnia, the 7 books of Narnia, Wrinkle in Time. I read a bunch of science fiction, like Asimov and Heinlein and all those, and it all merges together in my brain. Like I'm not sure which is which anymore because it was so long ago. But then as a older, and then I read a lot, like all the Tolstoys and the long, Ayn Rand and all the tomes of, political history, historical, whatever you call them. And then, but recently, like more kind of current, Dune was super influential. And it's sort of, some people equate like the moon part of Moon Deeds sort of with a bit of a vibe of Dune because it's a desertish kind of environment. It's got, it's got women who are clairvoyant and stuff. So it doesn't have the voice. I love the voice of Dune. But so I love that. Regarding movies, I love Star Wars, which is another science fantasy genre. I never read the Star Wars books, actually. And I guess there's like hundreds of them, like the whole Star Wars universe. I have never read a single Star Wars book, but I watched the movies probably like 100 times. And in terms of my style that I like, authors, it's like Robert Jordan and Robin Hobb. So people who love long, immersive, descriptive stuff. If you read my work, you're like, oh, I get it now, because I love that stuff, right? Whereas some people can't deal with it. They're like, oh, Robert Jordan, book 8 or whatever is just like, I can't deal with it. I actually loved it. I'm like, yeah, let's sit back, let's drink some tea, and let's find some other magic system to delve into.
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm reading Wheel of Time for the first time this year. I'm doing an informal read along on their channel, and we're at book 7 right now. So we're doing 1 a month.
It's a project for sure. It's a project. Yeah. But I love that immersive reading style, writing style, descriptive. I like to get really lost in a book, like really feel like I'm there.
Me too.
And I'm very, very picky because only a few writers do that to me. And I love to get like addicted to books where I have to read it, and I'll like the hours and pages will fly by. I love that. It's hard to find these days. I rarely get entranced, but I love, one of my favorite quotes is, I can't remember who said it. And it's something like, the job of an author is to entrance their reader. And that's my goal, is to put you in a different state of mind. That feels like you're kind of entranced, and that's my goal. And that's why I write the way I do. That's what Moon Deeds was, an experiment with trying to create a mood. And the second 2/3 actually was trying to elicit a mood where you feel you're on the moon. You can feel it, you can smell it, you feel you're there, and you're not in your current reality anymore. You're in that reality. Now, the first third of Moon Deeds is written in a very different style. It's much more plot driven. I wrote that much later. I wrote the original draft like 10, 12 years ago. And the first I rewrote the beginning of Moon Deeds, getting them to the from Earth, the part on Earth that gets them to the moon. I rewrote that multiple times. I have completely different first parts, totally. Like the first version was like 30 or 40 pages when they were on the Earth, and they immediately went to the moon. And now it's like 200 pages and is completely different. And I did that for various reasons. I did tons of beta reading, and people just didn't know quite what was going on. And so I tried to build out some of the lore and some of the foundation of what the dystopian Earth, what was going on, and what was going on with the antagonists, the Tegs. All that I developed so that people knew what was going on. And I did it very consciously, and I tested a lot. And some people were like, well, we don't need this. I'm like, I bet you do, because when it wasn't there, people asked and complained that they didn't know what's going on. Now, the way it is now, people in general know what's going on. I mean, obviously there's a lot more information and lore to unfold, but people seem to have a grounding in what's going on. And it is the first book that kicks off a very long series. So, and I tried not to be info dumpy. You do have the letter and the prologue at the beginning, this paper, Cassidy's paper, where she kind of describes the last 10 years or something, which, and I tested those. I almost didn't have the prologues at all, and then I added them in. Anyway, that's a really complex series. There's a lot going on. There's short arcs, there's long arcs. I could talk about the long arc that I kind of referred to at the very beginning of how it's kind of science fiction and fantasy, if you want to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the long arc being an origin story is like, where do we come from? How come humans are so weird and different from all the other, species on Earth? How do we get there? And there's a lot of history, a lot of different cultures and mythologies try to explain that, or try to answer that question, and religions try to answer that question. And a lot of cultures talk about an external entity being giving the seed of human life, whether it's like a virgin birth, whether it's a god coming down and inseminating, or whether it's a lot of cultures, ancient cultures, have cave drawings and stuff of like beings coming down from the stars, coming in Christianity. You have the beam of light, with the angels coming down on beams of light. You've got other myths about giants coming down from the mountains and basically breeding with the women down in the valleys. And so you've got all these different things of people coming down, or being coming down from above, and starting the current human culture that we have now. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got abduction, like space abduction stuff, and all that kind of stuff. So my mind is like, well, what if actually that's true? Like we are the result of a visitation from above. And in this case, I made it from another planet, from our ancestors, basically, that we are descended from an alien species, or not alien. We are from our ancestors from across the galaxy. We have cousins on other planets, because the home planet, there was a diaspora. They went off exploring and they settled various planets. So we have cousins, other humanoids who were genetically very closely related to on other planets. And so it's sort of a combination between fantasy and science fiction, because planets having settled other planets is science fiction, right? And anything having to do with like genetics is science fiction. But fantasy is the spiritual, religion, mythological sources of, some being our part of our history and our origin. So that's why it's kind of a combo.
I definitely see that in Moon Deeds. I can't wait to get to Light Fighters.
Yeah, Light Fighters. Let me stack these up here. Yeah, Light Fighters. Just gonna do some Light Fighters. Light Fighters, be careful. There's trigger warning content in there. It gets pretty dark. It's pretty intense and graphic. So anyone who's sensitive to violent sexual content and drug abuse should stay away from it. Little spoilery, but not much. Yeah, so that book is very intense. That, like I said, it gets dark, but it's also faster paced.
Mm.
I spent time, and some people complain too much time setting the scene of the moon. So once I've like elaborately set a scene, I typically I'm not going to the writing style does not continue. The way I tend to write, and you'll see the same thing in Heliotrope. I'll set a scene by giving a lot of detail so that the markers, you know where you are, you know what it looks like, you know the setting. And then in later scenes, whenever you pop back into that same setting, you know exactly where you are.
Right.
And I'll just give a couple of markers so you know, yeah, okay, I'm in this room, I'm on this planet, but I don't like re-describe everything. So I spent a lot of time describing the mood. And like I said, I was going for a mood almost like 2001 Space Odyssey, which I actually find very annoying, where they float around in space to music for like 10 minutes. I'm like, oh my God, how boring. I kind of did that in Moon Deeds, where you're looking at the moon dust and you're looking at Earth on the horizon, and people are like, all right, already, I get it. But I was trying to do that entrancing thing where you go kind of to different part of your brain. Like I said, I might have overdid it, but anyway, so I've established the scene very well in Moon Deeds. I don't have to re-describe everything. You know
Right.
where you are, you know what Peridome is, you know about the dust, you know about, mining soil for oxygen, and the players, the tags, Rodney's Rangers, you kind of know the deal. And then it's just basically plot and character mostly, and Light Fighters, and it was very quickly. Some people complain there's too much going on. They're like, oh my God, so much crap happens to these guys, like give them a break. So it's pretty intense. And even though it's long, it gets higher ratings than Moon Deeds and seems to go faster because, like I said, it's more plot driven action. And there's some like kind of cat and mouse stuff going on. Yeah. It's fun.
I appreciated your details that you put in, because I'm a very visual reader, and I, visualize and imagine what I'm reading, and I'm the type of reader that will get sucked into a book, and I'm not sitting on my chair reading the book, but I'm in the story as like one of the characters going along on the adventure with them. And so to be able to imagine and feel the moon atmosphere and everything going on around these characters, to me, I really appreciated that, because I've never been to the moon, so I don't know what what it's like, what they do on the moon. But because you put so much care into describing the atmosphere, I felt like I was there with the characters. And then, when we returned to a scene, I didn't have to like try to bring my brain back there and, go through that process again. I immediately knew, okay, this is the place that we're at, so this is the feel that it's going to be at. So I really appreciated that.
Yay.
Well, not everyone does, but I did.
I'm glad. That's what I was going for. And I knew that I was targeting a certain type of reader, because I know, for example, again, from Robert Jordan, where some people like really hate that. And so those people aren't going to really enjoy these books. And Heliotrope is similar in the scene setting. A very different book, single point of view character, medieval castles and queens and horses and all that. But it's also very descriptive. Now the new stuff, Darktown, the lit RPG stuff, is not as descriptive. It's descriptive enough, like the scene, you get a feel for it, but it doesn't like. It's more like almost a palate cleanser kind of book, like easy to read, fun, entertaining.
Yeah, it serves a different purpose.
Exactly.
So speaking of Heliotrope, I want to touch on this, because this is your SPFBO. I think that I got that all right.
Yeah.
Entry for this year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and Moon Deeds was in SPFBO 5, by the way. It was a semifinalist.
Right. So I haven't gotten to Heliotrope yet, but it's on my never-ending TBR. So one day I will definitely get to it, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I want to talk spoiler-free about Heliotrope, just to give that some publicity, since it's in SPFBO and it has a fantastic cover. And from what I've heard from other reviewers, people are loving it. So I was wondering if you could give us your elevator pitch on what to expect in Heliotrope.
Okay. I'm terrible at elevator pitches, but I'll give it a shot. But first, the cover artist is Dusan Markovic. He's fantastic. He's done a couple other covers in the indie circuit. Trials of Ashmount did that cover, and it's follow on. So yeah, he's fantastic. He draws from scratch, sketches and all original artwork. And he's super fun to work with. So yeah, elevator pitch for Heliotrope. Kind of like the blurb on the back. So it's a single point of view character from a retired warrior who was kind of the best warrior in the kingdom of Verdant Valley. He's 45. He's retired. The war ended. His son had been kidnapped. There was a practice in the kingdoms of when you like ransacked a village or whatever, they would kidnap the young boys and take them back as slaves. And so his son had suffered that fate. He thinks, he doesn't know for sure, but he thinks that his son, because his wife and daughter were actually killed during a raid. This all happens before the story begins. You learn about it. But it's part of the setup of the story. See how good I am in an elevator pitch? The elevator pitch has opened, the agent has left, and I'm still talking, and I haven't even gotten to it.
It's a long elevator ride.
It is. And we're stopping at every floor. And I say,
it's like the Willy Wonka elevator ride that just keeps going.
So anyway, but he's descended from mages. Magic was outlawed generations ago because different factions of the magic wielders were basically wreaking havoc and killing each other, and it ended up being outlawed. But anyway, he's descended from mages, but that magic was outlawed. But anyway, so he has a small farm and he works as a stonemason. And anyway, he's working at the castle, and he ends up being in the middle of a coup. And he ends up adopting a couple of orphans and kind of recreating the family that he lost and fleeing the kingdom and rediscovering the ancient magic.
Awesome. So what makes Heliotrope different than other books in its genre?
I actually did a thing, which is for several years, I consciously did not read in the SFF genre. I would read other books and lots of nonfiction, but I was specifically because I didn't want to imitate or to regurgitate the themes that everyone writes. So Heliotrope was just, people say it's different. It's unlike, it has similar themes, but it's unlike any book that they have read. I really departed from any formula. And I just went on this journey based on a magic system, which is relatively unique. The Heliotropes itself is a mosaic floor that's part of the magic system, and it does all sorts of different things to kind of discover as the story goes on. And there's other magic systems. And it's just the structure of the story is different. So I don't know. I mean, if you like epic fantasy, but you want something a little bit different that feels familiar but different, then try it out. Because it's not, a lot of the fantasy that I'm reading, the kind of medieval type fantasy that I'm reading has a lot of very similar, like a young teenager boy who, ends up having to, save the world and that kind of thing. So this is an older protagonist, which is not that common.
Yeah.
So that's different. There's animal companions. It's just part of the world. They don't talk. They're real animals, but they've got some connection. Horses and other animals, hunting falcon and stuff. So it's got that. And it's got the found family element in a very kind of organic and like heartfelt way.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just written differently. It's a
Yeah.
different structure.
You've said like all of my like key words for books that will like jump my TBR pile. Uh, older protagonist, animal companions, found family, like Heliotrope just like jumped off of my bookshelf, basically.
Okay. Do you have it? Did I
I
send you?
do. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I
Okay,
think
good.
that was one of the books that you sent to me when we
Uh-huh.
first started talking.
Okay, good. I think you have addition to it. There's edition 4 now, which is a different epilogue. So you can read that, but if you're interested in how the epilogue changes, you can go up on Kindle Unlimited or whatever. I don't know if you're on Kindle Unlimited. The Kindle book is only $2.99, and
Okay.
I'm about to do another free Kindle, but you can grab it to just see what the new epilogue is like if you're geeky curious like that.
I'm definitely geeky curious.
Yeah.
So where did you get the idea for Heliotrope from?
So this is interesting. I specifically said, so this is how Heliotrope came about. I was like knee deep, neck deep in Star Children Saga, and it was really kind of driving me crazy. And I was pitching it to agents and publishers and stuff, and I was like lost in this massive, complex worlds I was creating. And I was walking down a sidewalk at some con, I don't know, Chicago, maybe. I don't know. They do these agent walks where you get to like chat with an agent. We're going to go on a walk and you can chat with an agent. So I'm chatting with an agent. Actually, I think she was an acquiring editor for like DAW or something. I don't know. She was like influential, right? And I was trying to pitch her Star Children Saga, and she's like, She's like, why don't you just write something completely different? And I was like, at first I'm a little angry inside. I'm like,
Right.
like my baby? You want me to like, adopt a different baby? Like, what's wrong with my baby? Like, And then I thought about it. I was like, okay, I will. I'm going to show you, and I'm going to write something completely different. And I'm going to show you like how amazing I am. I get this really competitive thing. Like I get like angry about like that I haven't been able to achieve my goals, and other people have achieved their goals, and what's wrong with me? And I get this kind of, which for a while was kind of self-destructive.
Right.
But then I said, let me just take that energy. That energy, actually, Barbara, that's my real name, Barbara. My name is Barbara Palmer Pickering. And so Palmer Pickering is my middle name and my last name, which is my pen name. Anyway, so I said, Barbara, take that energy. That as your energy is passion. It's good. Just, channel it from like anger to motivation to drive, so that's what I tried to do. So anyway, so I said, okay, well, I'm going to take a break from Star Children Saga, and I'm just going to write something completely different. I said, okay, what am I going to write? I said, well, what do I love? Well, I love Robin Hobbs, and I love her Farseer trilogy. What was it about that made me love it so much? So I dissected her, like the different themes and her techniques and what she did that made me love that so much. And I said, aha, she's really pulling at heartstrings, and she's pulling at these sort of primal heartstrings. And one of those is Fitz was basically a bastard, right? He was an illegitimate child of the king. And he had a lot of magic, but he wasn't recognized for his magic. He was bullied for it because he was a bastard. But he was still part of the royal household, but he was bullied all the time and misused, and he was like in the dark rooms, learned to be an assassin when he and all this stuff was going on. I'm like, so the theme of not being recognized for yourself and for your merits and for your good qualities because of the station of your birth is something that historically and archetypically is infuriating. And it's happens to this day. It's happened all throughout history. So where whatever blood, your bloodline is, or whatever caste you were born into dictates how you're treated in society and how unfair that is. And so I said, okay, let me pull on that. Let me write something about that. So Telio, the main character of Heliotrope, is not recognized for his prowess as the best warrior in the kingdom because he wasn't born into noble blood. Right. So he doesn't get the top job at the castle as master of arms another nobleman was given it, even though Telio was better at it was more qualified.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the right bloodline. And so so there's this theme of Telio throughout the book of not being recognized for his worth, and also the magic being, in the past, his ancestors were mages. Not only were they mages, they were royal mages. And in the past, the mages had a place in the royal court, and they were very influential counselors, and they lived in the castle, and they were like respected, needed advisors. So he didn't get the benefit of having that either. He had like basically no respect, aside from the fact that, he was good with a sword, and they would send him out on the front lines to potentially get killed for the kingdom, whereas nobles would stand on the hill and watch the battle and then claim credit for the victory, right? So there's that dynamic. So that was the theme, the heartfelt and the whole orphan theme. So his son went missing, he's adopted an orphan. So that whole orphan bastard thing. So that was where all that came from, was me evaluating, analyzing Robin Hobb.
Okay. It also reminds me of Lancelot's story. Because he wanted to be a knight of the Round Table, but he wasn't of noble birth, and so he had to prove himself worthy of the Round Table. And minus the magic.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So those archetypal kind of mythological or, legends that kind of have a thread throughout history.
Nice. So is it safe to say then that the character came before the story?
Yes.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Now I want to switch back to Moondeeds. And we talked a lot, spoiler-free, about Moondeeds, so I want to jump into our spoiler chat, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
So I know this is like choosing a favorite kid, but do you have a favorite character, or who's the easiest character for you to write? There could be more than one. Or none at all.
So the funnest character for me to write was Gabira at the end. And in fact, that chapter of the Gabira, the sorceress, is the only chapter that remains intact from the first draft. Everything else was completely rewritten. And I just found her to be just so fun to write, just such a character, such a like crazy, powerful, devious, kind of eccentric, mysterious woman. So that was super fun. In terms of the two main protagonists, Cassidy and Tor, the twins, Tor I found pretty easy to write, but difficult in the sense that he's a male, and and in fact, I'll tell you a story in a second about how the rewrite of those two characters. Cassidy was pretty easy to write, but what I found was what I don't realize. So I don't know if, your age, how you grew up, but when I was growing up and I majored in education in college, well, I got a teaching certificate. So I did all the coursework for teaching elementary and through nursery through 8th grade. And there were all these themes about how to be careful about how you teach to boys and girls, because boys are socialized in our culture, at least they were when I was growing up, and I'm older than you, where the boys always took the active roles and the girls always took the passive roles, right? Boys, like for example, when I grew up, I went to Brownies and Girl Scouts, and my brothers went to Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And I would spend time in Girl Scouts at camp, Girl Scout camp, sweeping the tent, cleaning the tent, crocheting pot holders, stuff like cooking, learning how recipes. And I just learned a couple months ago, and it pissed me off, that what were my brothers doing at Boy Scout camp? They were doing target practice with guns.
Yeah.
right? So just very different. And so then as part of in literature classes and as a teaching, it was like, be careful not to, try to kind of break some of those stereotypes to give girls basically the opportunity to be doctors and to be lawyers and to break and to not necessarily have to become a housewife and a homemaker, right? If they don't want to, like, give them opportunities. So, and if boys want to cook, like, they should be able to cook, like, anyway. So, and it wasn't at the stage of like gender binary, non-binary stuff in that juncture of life. But it was just about having the freedom to choose different paths, right? Yeah. Occupationally. And so, but I still find myself writing women in passive roles, and people and my beta readers always complain about it. And the male characters get the active roles, but it's not completely that way, because the first draft of Moondeeds, they're both in Moondeeds now. They're both 20 and they're twins. The first draft, Cassidy was 15, Tor was 13. Cassidy was the leader and the active one because she was older and she took charge and she was the active, and Tor, being the younger brother, was more passive. And when I rewrote it, I gave Tor, I actually took chapters and I would reassign it. I say, okay, Tor's going to do this chapter that Cassidy used to do, and I'm going to just rewrite it. And I changed the names and I changed a little. And so, and then when I redid that, I ended up giving Tor a lot of the active roles and Cassidy a lot of the passive roles. And then, so it was just interesting, like psychologically, like why I did that. Why even in Darktown, I keep reworking it to give the female protagonist more active voice, a more active personality. So anyway, that's an interesting thing. I have no idea how I got off on that tangent. Oh, what characters I love. So so I would say it's easier to write Cassidy, but I'm not a passive person. So I don't know why I'm writing a passive role as a female character. It's really weird to me, except the excuse that I have. Well, she was active and I just like gave Tor her cool chapter because he's a boy, which again, like, what am I doing? Like, weird, right? Yeah. And then I also like Ridge, the third point of view character. He's a great character. Very interesting. I find him to be and he didn't exist at first. The whole first draft, there was no Ridge, and I didn't have an insight into the antagonist, the Tegs, or the dark side at all. And so I created that role to give a window into what's going on for the enemy, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the reverse side of things, who was your least favorite, or who was the hardest character to write?
Well, again, Tor with his military stuff, that was really hard. It took a lot of research, and I was always really insecure about it. And I would get all these soldiers to like beta read my stuff because of it. So that was tough. I mean, Balti is scary. So there's a couple of violent scenes, which one reviewer is like, she stopped reading it. And when Balti came in and did his like violent thing at the very opening of that part, and somebody said, they're like, oh, I was loving it until this, and then I threw the book away, so can't please everybody. But I definitely, I'm going to go off on a tangent again. I always wanted to write this to be an adult series. I wanted to get into difficult, dark adult themes. And so, in fact, one of the reasons I rewrote the entire first draft to age up the characters from 13 and 15 to 20, because I didn't want it pigeonholed as YA. And because I wanted to get into dark themes. And so, but Balti is a little bit hard to write, and you'll see in Light Fighters as well. He's just a terrible person. And so it's kind of hard to get in that, to write those. They're difficult. In fact, a couple of the scenes, like, I didn't want to go back and edit. I really don't want to live those scenes again. They're hard. So those were difficult.
So do you have a favorite scene from Moondeeds?
I really like the shamanistic aspects of Moondeeds. I love the plant spirit medicine. This plant spirit medicine came from, I spent a lot of years hanging out with a friend of mine who lived out in the wilderness, and she was a plant spirit medicine woman, and like for real. And it was fascinating. She would travel the world. So she was sort of like the Brianna Cassidy and Tor's mother. She would travel. I mean, my real friend, I dedicated Life Writers to her, actually, Linda Ema Showski. She traveled the world gathering herbs. She would make all her own, I was going to say potions, but tinctures, and, dried them, and she would prescribe medicinally. She had a practice where she would, in fact, she lived in this little town, and sometimes the doctors in the town, when they didn't know what to do or how to cure something, and they were at the end of the Western medicine solutions, they would send them to her, and she would often heal people. Yeah. So, and I'm getting shivers right now. So, so that I find completely fascinating. And there's also parts of the plant spirit medicine, like the embodiment of the plant spirit, like the bone spinner woman from the white Alyssa, the sweet Alyssum. That whole embodiment of a plant spirit into a body is, I took from ayahuasca ceremonies in South America, where you would take this ayahuasca and then you would see entities, basically spirits, people, embody and interact with you. So that's where that came from. Yeah. So that, I really love that whole aspect of it.
Was there one scene that was the hardest to write out of all of them?
In Moon Deeds?
Yeah.
The whole first part was hard. I told you I rewrote it like so many freaking times. So I would say that, and the first chapter, I redid the first chapter so many times because I was so paranoid and like beat up from pitching and querying and like all these rules, like, hey, it can't be more than 400 pages long and 350, and no one's ever going to buy it. And then I would see all these books coming out 800 pages. I'm like, all these bestsellers. I'm like, people are crazy.
Especially in fantasy.
I do understand it. I like really feel it in my pocketbook that it's expensive to produce a book of that size, and I have to end up charging a lot of money, and I make like $1 off of these $30 books, because the retailer and the printers take the rest because it's print on demand. It's expensive, and editing and having to read your book like 10 zillion times like gets hard, right? That many pages. Rereading it.
Sick of reading it?
Do I ever get sick of reading it?
Yeah, like when you have to reread it so many times.
Yeah, I don't get sick of the content. Like, I enjoy it when I'm reading it. It's just, it feels like work. It's like, oh, okay, I just read it. I just spent 2 weeks reading this whole thing cover to cover, and now I just have to dive right in and do it again. It's just tiring. And I have a full-time job. It's like, this is my full-time job. Like, I do this at night when I'm tired already. And so it's just work,
Yeah.
But it's enjoyable work, but still it's work. And it's a lot easier to do a 350 or 250 page, it's going to be 350 printed page book of Darktown than it is this 800 page, because it just takes half as long. But anyway, and one of the rules they tell you is agents are only going to read like the first page, or if you're lucky, the first chapter. So it has to be really, really good. And so I was like, oh my God, it has to be really, really good. And so I'd like rewrite it, and I rewrite it, and I rewrite it and rewrite it. And so that was hard.
Yeah.
And the blurb is hard. The elevator pitch, which I'm terrible at, as you witnessed, writing a blurb is hard. It's like took me as long to write the freaking blurb as the whole book.
Right.
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much. I mean, ask any.
Well, you have to sum up an 800-page book into a couple sentences without giving away any spoilers about what happens in the book. I can't imagine.
Yeah, it's tough.
Well, I think your efforts, at least in my point of view, paid off, because Tor was one of my favorite characters. I really enjoyed his points of views that we got, and it felt like he was one of the reasons why I gravitated towards him, is because it felt like he was very sincere and cared about his family. And that's kind of what drove his actions and what he was doing. And it wasn't just having a soldier for the sake of having a soldier and having him do this stuff because he was a soldier, but he was doing it to protect his family and Cassidy. And truly believed in what he was doing, and something about his character I just kept gravitating towards, which is not, it's a little bit unusual for me in writing or in reading, because I usually tend to gravitate towards characters that I'm most alike. So a lot of times I'll gravitate towards the female characters, and especially, like, I'm a huge side character fan. The secondary characters I always gravitate towards, because I always see myself more as a secondary type of character than the main character, the hero of the book. But my attention just kept going to Tor. Every time he was on the page, I would look for, what's Tor doing now? What's Tor doing now? What's he thinking now? And so I really loved that character. And I think the first part of your book really, like, captured my attention immediately. I started reading the prologue and I'm like, okay, I'm here. Let's see where this takes me. And then I read, the first chapter, chapter 1, and I was like, okay, I need to read this until I finish it, and then I need to go on to book 2. I was sucked in immediately. So I think your efforts, at least for me, really paid off.
Yeah.
So what do you want readers to come away with after reading Moondeeds?
Kind of a sense of wonder, and like really wondering where we came from, and what is possible in the universe, and what is magic, and what's technology versus magic. Just kind of a curiosity, and thinking maybe there's more to this world than what is visible.
Yeah, I think you definitely achieved that. So now I want to kind of talk about your future writing projects, the future of you got 2 big series, you got that lit RPG coming up. What should we be on the lookout from you next?
Yeah. So Heliotrope is a standalone, although there is room in the world for more if I wanted, but it's not in any near-term plan. I like having a standalone, a kind of one and done, and people like appreciate having that as well. So Moondeeds, so it's going to be a long series, at least 6 books, if not 12, maybe 7 is what I'm thinking right now. I don't know. But I'm breaking it into trilogies or duologies. So the first 3 books is the Moondeeds trilogy, I'm calling it. It's Moondeeds, Light Fighters, and the 3rd book is called Anaximenes, which is the names of the craters, those big craters. And I'm working on that right now. I'd written a lot of it a long time ago, and then when I started back on it, I'm like, I'm not thrilled with it anymore. So I'm kind of redoing a lot of it, and I resorted to having to fairly heavily outline to keep all the. There's a lot of different threads that kind of have to all come together, and so it's a project. And I'm expanding the lore and the world, and Light Fighters brings in the perspective of the Star People, which are the ones that the Star Children are seeking. So it brings in that whole again epic fantasy aspect of it. So Anaximenes I'm working on. I've stated that it's going to be out in 2024. I'll give it a 50-50 chance it'll be done in 2024. Depends on how the next few months go. If I can, have a solid draft that I'm happy with, then I think I could pull it off by next year sometime. I'm trying not to make it as long, hopefully I'm going for between like 400 and 600 pages, but I tend to write long. So I don't know. So there's that. And then the Dark Town is coming out this year, end of this year. And that's the lit RPG. And it is actually a very long series. Each book is a level of a game. It's a game called the Dragon's Game. There's actually 3 games. There's a Dragon's Crawl. I can't remember what I call. I think the first one I called Dragon Crawl. The second is Dragon's Chrysalis, and the 3rd is Dragon's Ascension. And each one has 7 levels or so, and each book is a level. So Darktown is the first level, and the Swamp is the 2nd level. And I'm already starting to take notes and develop that a little bit. But it took me 2 months to write Darktown, and it was pretty solid. Like when I was done with it, like it's pretty just having minor edits at this point. So I am hoping that I can do one of those a year in between my big, in between the Star Children saga. And that's all I'm going to be working on for the foreseeable future. I have been doing some short stories. I have a short story I'm working on for Dom's anthology, at Advent of Winter. I have that. I have to do a revision pass on that. But mostly I'm just dedicating myself to Star Children Saga, and then taking a break once a year for Darktown, for Tales of Temerity is the name of the whole series. Temerity is the main character. It's a 16-year-old tavern wench with a hobgoblin sidekick, who the hobgoblin shape shifts into a cat. So
Awesome.
that's kind of the duo of the main characters on that.
Great. Well, that's all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
Just keep watching SPFBO 9. Let's see if I make it into the semifinals. At least I'm waiting. It's like a whole 5-month, I think, process, and
Must be agony.
we just finished 1 month, so we got 4 more months. Yeah, I mean, having gone through it once before, I'm sort of like, I can't get all too wound up about it, but I do check. I'm like, have they like cut my book yet? This sort of Damocles is like hanging over my head, like.
Yeah,
so,
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, and support other indie authors. There's a lot of good books out there, and we don't get a lot of the publicity and promotions that the trad publishing community gets. So people like you, Kate, and our audience are what makes it possible for authors like me to actually have our books read. So it's very grateful to all of you.
Well, that's why I love doing these, because you guys don't have those resources that traditionally published authors have. You got to do it all on your own. And since I've been reading self-pub, I've read some self-pub books that are 10 times better than traditionally published books, because you guys have the heart in it that some traditionally published authors don't have anymore. So I like to do these to support you all and bring attention to your books that deserve it. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone out there that is watch this live or is watching this on replay. If you haven't read Heliotrope or Moon Deeds yet, do yourself a favor and go get it now. There'll be links in the description below for all of Palmer's books. And joining us next week for episode 14 with Michael Schuthless. I never know if I'm saying his name right, but he'll tell me next week if I'm saying it right. And hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye.